I said it in front of all 25 guests because I was done pretending to be part of the decor. I'm not a luxury maid, Sam. I'm your mother. The crystal clinked into silence. I could feel the heat of the fireplace on my back, smell the cinnamon pine cones staged along the marble mantel, and hear the distant winter wind scrape the bay. The Hamptons aren't kind to honesty. But here I was, Sam, blanched, the kind of pale that drains power out of a face. Lucas stared at me like I'd just knocked over a $10,000 sculpture. The guests, executives' spouses in jewel-toned cashmere and curated diamonds, Lucas's venture buddies, neighbors with names that opened doors, watched me as if I had set the tree on fire. Then Miss Clara Romero cleared her throat, the folder in her hands, cream linen, hand-tied, with a navy ribbon. Felt like a funeral program for the old version of me. She spoke clearly, her voice cutting the room with a careful kindness. Before dinner is served, as requested, I'll read the addendum to the Callahan Family Trust. Sam tried to smile like a good hostess, lips trembling. It's just a quick formal thing, Mom. A paperwork hiccup. But it wasn't. It never was. Not with secrets. This old. I didn't wake up that morning planning to become an inconvenient mother. I woke up planning to bring my own pie. The last act of someone desperately trying to remain relevant in her daughter's gleaming life. It had started 2 weeks earlier with a phone call. Sam's voice was sunlit and busy, the way it always was lately. Efficient, distracted, already moving on to the next thing even. Before this conversation had begun. Mom, she said, we're doing Christmas at the house this year. The Hamptons place. 25 guests. Lucas's partners, some neighbors, my friends. It's going to be magazine level. I need you here early to manage arrivals, coordinate the staff, plate the hors d'oeuvres, that kind of thing. You know how you do it. How I do it. Not, would you like to come? Not, what would make you comfortable? Not even, we've hired help. I was slotted in, an elegant-sounding function, inside my own family. Sam, I said carefully, measuring my words like expensive spices, I'm your mother, not your household manager. She laughed like I was charming. Mom, don't be dramatic. You're the only one who can make people feel at home. I said I'd think about it and hung up. My small house hummed around me, not grand like Sam's Hamptons mansion, but mine. The old cedar floors kept their secrets. Whiskers, the scrappy gray cat I'd rescued from a November snowfall behind Amagansett library, hopped onto the windowsill and chirped softly, checking on me the way no human did without an agenda. I made tea and took out a box I hadn't opened in years, my father's letters. My father, Edward Callahan, had worked on tugboats and counted respect in deeds, not words. He had made me promise to never let anyone use me to decorate their lives while erasing me from my own. Years of saying yes had worn that promise thin. 2 days later, Lucas called. He was all velvet confidence, the kind that comes from never hearing the word no. Diane, we'll need you from early morning on. A few dietary restrictions. You'll coordinate the kitchen entry so guests don't clutter the main foyer. We'll do a quick run through Christmas Eve. This is important for our relationships, you understand. I understood. I just didn't agree. That night, I found an old folder labeled Callahan Family Trust. My father's handwriting. A clause I hadn't noticed because I'd never expected to need it. It referenced primary control of any property purchased using trust-backed funds, transferring to me first upon widowhood. All those careful words, a little dry, a little legal. But under them, love. I called Miss Clara Romero, the notary who'd helped finalize my father's last paperwork. She met me at Southampton's quiet municipal building, where the walls smelled of paper and time. She reviewed the documents. She looked me straight in the eyes and said the sentence that would change my life. Diane, your father made sure you wouldn't be invisible. The law simply mirrors that intention. Will it make me the villain? I asked. She shook her head gently. It will make you visible. Visibility is often mistaken for defiance by people who benefit from your silence. I invited Clara to the Christmas dinner. Read it then, I said, in the light. And now here we were, with Clara unfolding those documents while my daughter's perfectly choreographed holiday crashed around her. Clara continued. Per the late Edward Callahan, a quiet, old-school gentleman who believed in dignity. My father, I said, steady. Sam's grandfather. Clara nodded. Upon the event of retirement and widowhood, primary occupancy, control, and decision-making authority over the family home and any properties purchased with inherited funds shall transfer to his daughter, Diane Callahan, not to any subsequent generation, until such time as she elects to cede those rights. If respect, care, and shared responsibility are not demonstrated toward Diane, documented incidentally or formally, the trust reserves the right to freeze distributions to any beneficiaries found to be exploiting or humiliating her. The room inhaled as one body. Sam's grip on her etched champagne flute faltered. That's ridiculous. Dad left me. Clara turned another page. Your father left you discretionary funds held under performance and conduct clauses. The Hamptons' property was purchased using trust-backed funds. Title is held in a family vehicle, and control was always meant to vest with Diane first, per this addendum. Lucas stepped forward, smile hardening. That's not enforceable. Clara slid a notarized, stamped copy across the marble console. It is. It's been notarized, logged, and acknowledged. She paused and glanced at me. Ms. Callahan, are you ready to declare your intent? Every eye fell on me. Every year spent swallowing my voice rose up to the back of my throat. I looked at my daughter, the woman I loved, the girl I raised, and felt both ache and clarity. Yes, I said. I will not host or serve 25 guests for Christmas. I will not be treated like staff in a home bought with my father's legacy. If that means tonight's dinner is canceled, I faced Sam fully, then it will be canceled. The house isn't on your calendar. It's in my care. The week before Christmas, Sam had everything on a schedule. Snowflake-shaped napkin rings, eucalyptus runners, a Montclair coat on the spare bed for an influencer friend who might pop by, and a caterer who was short-staffed, so, Mom, you'll fill the gap. I arrived with my own key, the one she'd given me when the place was new, and the ocean view had made even her quiet for a minute. I could still feel the cold shock of that first winter beam of sun on the bay. Whiskers slinked out of my coat the second I set my bag down. He explored, tail high, a small pilgrim in a land that sparkled too much. I heard Lucas on a call. Yeah, it's covered. Her mother's handling domestic. Don't worry. Her mother, domestic. Sam whisked in, beautiful in winter, white knit, face taut with importance. Mom, quick changes, gluten-free plates labeled in gold, pescatarian plating separate, caviar tasting for investors out on the back deck, careful with the heat lamps, and everyone is allergic to stress, so smile. Like we do. Do we do that? I asked softly. Or do I do that, and you take the bow? She didn't hear me, or chose not to. The rehearsal for Christmas Eve turned into a live fire test. Staff ran late, deliveries shifted, a photographer wanted authentic prep moments. The photographer tried to stage a shot of me arranging samplers in the pantry. The light's so honest in here. I stepped back and said, "No photos, please." He blinked, confused. People don't expect older women to say no. That night, I slept in the guest room with Whiskers tucked under my arm, his warm purr where panic usually lived. I could hear the ocean arguing with the wind, a cold, steady argument that sounded like truth. You don't have to do this. Christmas morning cracked open. The sky was tinfoil bright. Guests arrived with coats that had to be named, cheek kisses that had to be smiled through, and compliments that felt like reviews. Sam, the house. Lucas, what a spread. Diane, they'd say, if they said it. You look so helpful. In the kitchen, one of Lucas's friends, on the phone said, "Yes, service is tight here. They've got the mother running a tight ship." I felt my father's calloused hand turn in mine, the way it used to when he'd teach me how to secure a knot. Firm, patient, unbreakable. That was when I texted Clara. Now, before dinner, please. Sam swept in, cheeks flushed with hostess victory. Mom, once Ms. Romero reads whatever this is, we smile, we toast, and we move on. Agreed? No, I said. We don't move on. We move different. She blinked. What does that even mean? It means I'm done earning my seat at my own table. And now, as Clara continued reading from my father's addendum, I watched the slow dawn of understanding break across the faces in the room. Additionally, Clara said, her voice steady and professional, Diane's late neighbor and friend, Mrs. Eleanor Briggs, executed a small, separate will 18 months ago. With it, she left a bequest specifically to Diane, triggered upon any humiliating or exploitative treatment by immediate family. The bequest funds a personal studio space and a small art scholarship dedicated to, she smiled, Whiskers, the stray cat Diane rescued last winter, who became the house's quiet heartbeat. The scholarship name is a bit whimsical. The Whiskers and Widows Fellowship. It includes a personal stipend. Clara turned to me. It gives you options, real ones. Gasps. Stares. A few guests looked away, ashamed for all the times they'd watched Sam command me like a concierge while calling me Mom for warmth. Sam's face crumpled, not with cruelty, but with the terrible recognition that the show was over. All the polished silver and curated branches and rented catering staff could not choreograph the one thing she had never really learned: respect. Whiskers padded softly into the doorway and sat like sentry on the line between the kitchen and the living room. Children noticed him first, the way kids always notice the truth, whispering, "Is that your cat?" I nodded, and they smiled like something real had finally entered the stage set. Sam's first response was denial. "No, this is misread. We bought this house. It's ours." Clara answered evenly. "The funds originated from the trust. The structure was compliant, but control and override rights are as stated." Lucas moved into damage control. "Diane, obviously we want you comfortable. We can resolve this offline. Shall we continue with the evening?" "Offline. Because power always prefers private corridors." I turned to the caterer, who had paused mid-motion, torn between contract and conscience. "Please have the staff sit. They've been on their feet all day," I said. "We're going to change the plan." Sam stared. "Change what plan?" "The plan where I set the table and lose my voice while everyone else practices their networking. The plan where I earn my place by feeding people who misname me as staff." "You're humiliating me," she whispered. "No," I answered, the gentlest truth in my mouth. "I'm humbling both of us. There's a difference." I asked the guests to take a breath. "Dinner's not canceled. It's corrected." Then I invited everyone, guests, staff, neighbors, to a buffet line where everyone served themselves, where the caterer was thanked by name, where the staff ate first, and where portions were not a performance but a gift. It wasn't rebellion. It was alignment. The caterer, Monica, I learned her name was Monica, looked at me with something between shock and gratitude. I nodded, and she quietly directed her team to transform the formal sit-down into a community-style buffet. The look on Lucas's face was worth every uncomfortable moment. The carefully assigned seating chart became meaningless as people formed small groups, some sitting on the antique stairs, others finding places on the window seats. "This is irregular," one of Lucas's partners muttered, but his wife elbowed him and whispered something that made him redden. A young server named Javier approached me with a glass of wine. "For you, Ms. Callahan." The good stuff they were saving for the toast. He winked, and I felt something I hadn't in years: complicity in joy rather than performance. Sam stood frozen by the fireplace, her perfect hostess smile slipping like frost on a warming day. I watched her try to recalibrate, to find her footing in this new reality, where her mother was not an extension of the household staff, but the center of something changing. "Mom," she finally said, approaching me with careful steps. "Can we talk? Just us?" I nodded. "After dinner, with Clara present." She flinched at that, but nodded. The addition of a witness felt threatening to her. Had she become so used to saying one thing in private and another in public? The evening transformed. Without the rigid structure, conversations became authentic. One of the neighbors, an older gentleman I'd seen at the library, sat next to me and introduced himself properly. "Richard Townsend," he said, offering his hand. "I've seen you with that cat around town. Never knew you were Sam's mother? You seem too grounded." I laughed, surprising myself with the sound. "That's the nicest insult I've ever received." "Not an insult," he corrected, his eyes crinkling. "Just an observation that wealth and wisdom don't always share the same address." Throughout the evening, Whiskers became an unexpected focal point. He moved from person to person as if conducting a quiet inspection, spending the most time with those who seemed genuinely kind. The children adored him, and I watched as one little girl in red velvet explained to her distracted father that cats choose their people, not the other way around. When Sam began to cry quietly, not showy, not manipulative, but because she truly didn't understand how she had gone so wrong, I wanted to hold her. But love without boundaries is a leak, not a river. As the evening wound down, guests began to leave. The usual artificial prolonging of goodbyes was replaced by genuine warmth. Several people thanked me personally, making eye contact in a way they never had before. "This turned out better than expected," one woman said, squeezing my hand. "I hate those formal dinners where everyone's checking their phones under the table." Lucas maintained a professional smile, but I could see the calculations running behind his eyes. He'd married into the Callahan name, into what he thought was unquestioned access to wealth and property. Now he'd learned there were conditions, moral ones at that. As the last guest departed, we were left with the aftermath. Monica and her team cleaning efficiently, Sam staring out at the bay as if it might offer guidance, and Lucas making urgent phone calls in the study. Clara approached me with a knowing smile. Ready for that talk? I nodded, suddenly exhausted, but clear-headed. Yes, let's do this while I still have the strength. We sat not in the polished great room, but in the small glass nook off the kitchen, where you can see the bay push its long silver shoulder toward land. Clara brought tea and paper. Whiskers curled on the bench and slept like a peace flag. Sam joined us, her makeup smudged beneath her eyes, looking younger and more vulnerable than she had in years. Lucas declined to join, claiming he needed to manage the fallout with their friends. Mom, Sam said quietly, was I that bad? You were busy, I answered, and success makes a person deaf if they don't. Take care. You were also unkind in little ways that add up. You loved me, but you used me. I taught you how. She flinched. How could you have taught me that? By always saying yes, by making it look easy, by protecting you from the cost of your choices. I gave you the theater and told you to ignore the stagehands. I was the stagehand. I thought, she said, voice breaking, that I was honoring you by inviting you into everything. You were inviting me to serve everything, I corrected gently, and calling it love. Clara slid a simple document across the table. Here's what I recommend, she said. An amendment to the household protocols, signed by all adult residents. It's not legal requirement, it's relational hygiene. It states how responsibility is shared, how guests are invited, who decides what, and a baseline of respect clauses. She smiled faintly. It's mundane. But you'd be surprised how rescues begin with mundane clarity. We set rules. They were plain as bread. No event at the house would be assigned to me without my explicit consent. Staff are introduced by name and eat before cleanup begins. No photography of me doing unpaid labor to make a brand look homey. If I don't want to attend, I don't attend. No emotional fines. Any inheritance-related changes are discussed with Clara present. No more offlines. Sam nodded, tears streaking foundation. I don't deserve your generosity. No one does, I said. That's why it's generous. Then, with her own pen, gold, monogrammed, trembling, Sam signed. Lucas signed too, stiffly, but he signed. I signed last. And then we ate what was left over and warm at a metal prep table in the back with the staff, where names were exchanged and jokes made, and that tight thing inside my chest loosened all the way. One of the servers scratched Whiskers behind the ear. He's got good taste, she said. He only sits with the kind ones. In the week that followed, something shifted in the house's bones. The freezer door. Sound stopped feeling like a command. The bay's winter light didn't glare anymore. It glowed. Sam came downstairs in wool socks, no makeup, face softer around the eyes. Mom, she said, voice small. I invited people into a fantasy and made you the prop that kept it believable. I'm sorry. I accept that, I said. Now do different. She did. Tentatively, clumsily, but honestly. She wrote personal thank you notes to the catering staff and tipped fiercely. She booked a local shelter donation in Whiskers' name, blankets, food, vet credits. She hosted a neighborhood potluck where she did the dishes herself, and everyone laughed when she admitted she'd never loaded a dishwasher right. I didn't attend them all. I didn't need to. That was the point. Ms. Clara Romero scheduled one final meeting for the new year, in daylight, with calendars and gentle coffee. She had re-explained the Callahan Trust, how my father's clauses were not traps, but guardrails for dignity. Then she turned to me with a little surprise. Mrs. Briggs's bequest includes a lease option on a small studio space on Main Street, Southampton, North Light, second floor, a view of the street where life doesn't rush so much in winter. It's yours to accept or decline. I accepted, not because I wanted to run away from my family, but because I wanted to run towards something that had waited decades. I moved an easel in, a chair, a small stereo that plays Billie Holiday too softly. I kept one frame empty for a painting I would earn with a day I truly felt free. But new beginnings are rarely smooth. 3 weeks after Christmas, Lucas appeared at my studio door, his cashmere coat too heavy for the heated space. Diane, he said, not bothering with pleasantries, we need to discuss the summer schedule. We have commitments. I looked up from my canvas, where I'd been experimenting with the way light catches on water. Hello to you too, Lucas. And what commitments are we referring to? He sighed, the sound of a man unused to explaining himself. The Hamptons social calendar, the Whitaker's annual clam bake, the benefit for the Arts Council. Ironic now that you're suddenly artistic. His smile was tight. Sam needs you to confirm your participation. I set down my brush. Did Sam send you to ask me this? He shifted. I'm handling the practicalities. She's been emotional lately. Emotional. Yes. Unsettled. Since Christmas. Since you... He stopped himself. Since things changed. I studied him. This man who had married my daughter not just for love, I suspected, but for the clean, sharp lines of her pedigree. Lucas, did you read the document we all signed? Of course. Then you know the procedure. Any event participation is discussed directly with me, with reasonable notice, and without assumption. His jaw tightened. This is a family home. Families have obligations. Agreed. And one of those obligations is respect. Another is honesty. I gestured to the chair across from me. Sit. Tell me what's really going on. He remained standing. The Callahan name means something in this community. We have an image to maintain. And what image is that, Lucas? The wealthy family with the convenient mother/servant? Or perhaps something more authentic? His phone buzzed, and he checked it quickly. Always connected. Always half present. I don't have time for philosophical debates about authenticity, Diane. I need confirmations for the calendar. I stood, suddenly aware of my own height, my own presence. No. What you need is to understand that I'm not an asset to be managed. I'm a person making choices about my own life. If Sam wants to discuss summer plans, she can call me directly. We can have lunch, like people do. He left shortly after, frustrated but unable to argue with the simple truth that I was no longer available as a convenience. That evening, Sam called, her voice small through the phone. Mom? I heard Lucas came by. He did. I didn't send him. No. A long pause. Can I come see the studio? Just me. No agenda. 2 days later, she arrived with coffee and a paper bag of still warm croissants. She'd dressed simply, jeans, a sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look like the girl who used to help me make pancakes on Sunday mornings. It's nice, she said, looking around the space. It feels like you. How would you... know? I asked, not unkindly. You haven't seen much of me in years. Just what I could do for you. She winced but nodded. I deserve that, but I'm trying to see now. She sat by the window, watching people pass below on the street. What are you working on? I showed her the canvas. A study of light on water. Nothing revolutionary, just honest. I'm remembering how to see things as they are, not as they're presented. That's what I'm trying to do too, she said quietly. With you. With everything. We talked that day, really talked, for the first time in years. She told me about the pressure she felt to maintain appearances, about Lucas's family expectations, about how she'd lost herself in the performance of success. I don't know who I am without all the trappings, she admitted. That's terrifying. I know, I said. I felt the same way when your father died. Like I'd been erased along with him. But I'm still here, Sam. And so are you, underneath all the staging. As she left, she hugged me tightly. I missed you, Mom. Even when you were right there, I missed you. I missed myself too, I said. But I'm finding my way back. February brought snow that silenced the streets of Southampton. In my studio, I developed a routine. Coffee at dawn, painting until my shoulders ached. Then a walk with Whiskers in a special carrying bag I'd found at the pet store. He'd poke his head out, surveying the world with regal indifference until something, a bird, a blowing leaf, caught his attention and transformed him into a creature of pure focus. I began to recognize the faces. On Main Street. The barista who remembered my order. The bookstore owner who saved art magazines for me. The other artists who rented studios in the building. A ceramicist named Elaine. A retired English professor who wrote poetry. A young man who made intricate paper sculptures. We nodded to each other, sometimes shared meals, occasionally critiqued each other's work with the gentle honesty of people who understood the courage it takes to create. One Tuesday, Clara stopped by with a folder of paperwork. Just updates, she said, setting it on my work table. Nothing urgent, but I wanted to see how you're settling in. I offered her tea, and we sat by the window, watching snow drift past the old buildings. You seem different, she observed. Lighter. I am, I said. I'm remembering what it feels like to be curious instead of careful. She smiled. That's a good way to put it. She hesitated, then added, I saw Sam yesterday at the coffee shop. She asked about you. What did you tell her? That you're doing well, that she should ask you herself. Clara's eyes were kind but direct. She seemed uncertain about whether she was welcome here. I sighed. It's complicated. I'm still sorting through decades of patterns. Take your time, Clara said. But remember, redefining a relationship doesn't have to mean ending it. That evening, I called Sam. I heard you ran into Clara, I said when she answered. I did. A pause. I wasn't sure if you wanted space or... I don't know what you want, Mom. I want to know my daughter as she really is, I said. Not as the perfect hostess. Not as the woman who needs me to fill in the gaps, but as herself. Messy, uncertain, real. I'm not sure I know who that is anymore, she admitted. Then let's find out together. Come to the studio tomorrow. Bring lunch. She arrived with sandwiches from the deli and an uncertain smile. As we ate, I showed her my latest work, a series of small canvases capturing the changing light on the high bay through different hours and weathers. These are beautiful, she said, studying them closely. I had no idea you could do this. Neither did I replied. I'm still surprising myself. A comfortable silence fell between us, the kind we hadn't shared in years. Lucas and I are having problems, she said finally, staring out the window. Ever since Christmas, things have been strained. I waited, giving her space to continue. He's angry that I'm not handling you better. She made air quotes with her fingers, as if you were a PR situation to manage. And what do you think? She looked at me directly. I think he married the idea of me more than the reality. The Callahan name, the trust fund, the connections. And I let him because it was easier than figuring out who I really was. I reached across the table and took her hand. That's the most honest thing you've said in years. She squeezed my fingers, her eyes filling with tears. I don't know what to do, Mom. I built this life, this image, and now I'm not sure I even want it. You don't have to decide everything today, I said. Just start by being truthful. With yourself, with Lucas, with the world. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I want to try painting. Would you teach me? That afternoon, I set up a small canvas for her next to mine. I showed her how to mix colors, how to hold a brush, how to look at something until you really see it. Her first attempts were awkward, hesitant, but she approached it with a concentration I hadn't seen in her since she was a child learning to ride a bike. It's harder than it looks, she said, frustrated when her strokes didn't capture what she intended. Most worthwhile things are, I replied. We fell into a pattern. Twice a week, Sam would come to the studio. Sometimes we painted. Sometimes we just talked. Sometimes we sat in companionable silence, each lost in our own thoughts but together in the shared space. Through these visits, I learned things about my daughter I'd never known. How she secretly loved science fiction novels but hid them because Lucas thought they were lowbrow. How she missed the simplicity of our old life before her father's death, before the trust fund complicated everything. How she'd always felt she had to be perfect to be worthy of the Callahan name. Grandpa would have hated what we became, she said one day, adding shadows to her still life attempt. All show, no substance. Your grandfather valued honesty above all, I agreed. He worked with his hands and believed in looking people in the eye when you spoke to them. I wish I'd known him better, she said softly. You can still honor who he was, I told her. Not through money or status, but through integrity. March arrived with milder weather and unexpected news. Sam arrived at the studio looking both nervous and determined. I've asked Lucas for a separation, she said without preamble. I set down my brushes. Are you okay? She nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again. I don't know, it feels terrifying and right at the same time. What happened? She sat heavily in the chair by the window. Nothing dramatic. No affair, no big fight, just clarity. We were discussing summer plans again, all these social obligations, and I suddenly realized I didn't want any of it. I didn't want to be the Callahans anymore, at least not the version we've been playing. How did he take it? She gave a small, sad smile, like it was a negotiation he could win. He started offering compromises, fewer events, more private time. He didn't understand that. It wasn't about the calendar. It was about who we've become. I studied her face, the familiar lines of her jaw, her father's eyes, a new resolution in her expression that reminded me of my own reflection lately. What will you do now? I asked. I don't know exactly. I'm staying in the guest house for now. Lucas is keeping up appearances, telling everyone I'm focused on a personal project. She laughed without humor, which I suppose is true in a way. I reached for her hand. I'm proud of you, Sam. This isn't easy. I learned from you, she said, squeezing my fingers. Watching you reclaim yourself, it made me realize how much of myself I'd given away. That evening, after Sam left, I sat with Whiskers on the small couch in my studio, watching the sunset paint the buildings gold. I thought about the circular nature of lessons, how I'd taught Sam to accommodate by example, and how my own reclamation had shown her another way forward. We're all works in progress, aren't we? I murmured to Whiskers, who responded with a contemplative purr. April brought rain and revelation. Lucas arrived at my studio unannounced, his tailored appearance at odds with the paint-splattered space. This has gone far enough, he said without greeting. You've turned my wife against me, against our lifestyle, against everything we've built. I set down my palette knife calmly. Hello, Lucas. Sam is a grown woman making her own choices. Choices influenced by you. His voice was controlled but threaded with anger. Ever since that Christmas stunt with the trust documents, she's been different. Questioning everything. Declining invitations. People are talking. People always talk, I said. The question is whether we live for their conversation or our own truth. He paced the small space, looking around with barely disguised contempt. This is what you want for her? Art projects and simplicity? She's a Callahan. She has responsibilities to the name. The Callahan name stands for integrity, not social calendars. I replied. My father worked on boats, Lucas. He valued honest work and honest relationships. The money came later, but the values were always there. Lucas stopped pacing and faced me directly. I'm going to be frank, Diane. I've consulted with attorneys. There are ways to challenge the trust, to argue that you're acting against the family's interests. By painting, by reclaiming my dignity, by helping my daughter find hers. I shook my head. You won't win that argument, Lucas. Not legally, and not morally. We'll see. His smile was thin. The Hamptons' summer season is approaching. Sam needs to decide which side she's on, the life we built together or whatever this is. He gestured dismissively at my studio. After he left, I sat quietly, listening to the rain against the windows. Then I called Clara. Lucas is threatening legal action over the trust, I told her when she answered. She didn't sound surprised. I expected this. Don't worry. Your father's provisions are solid. But Diane, be prepared. When people feel their power slipping, they rarely surrender gracefully. That warning proved prophetic. Over the next few weeks, Lucas launched what Sam later called his whisper campaign. Casual comments at the club about my mental health concerns. Sympathetic sighs about how retirement has been difficult for Diane. Suggestions that the trust documents might have been signed under duress, given my fragile state after my husband's death. The Hampton social circle, that carefully cultivated garden of influence, began to divide. Some believed Lucas's insinuations. Others, particularly those who had witnessed the Christmas dinner transformation, remained skeptical. A few reached out to me directly, including Richard Townsend, the neighbor who had sat with me at Christmas. Ignore the noise, he advised during a chance meeting at the bookstore. Southampton has a short memory. By next season, they'll be gossiping about someone else's divorce. I appreciated his kindness, but felt a deep sadness for Lucas's inability to understand what really mattered. He was fighting to preserve an image while missing the substance beneath it. Sam, meanwhile, grew stronger in her resolve. She moved completely out of the main house and into the guest cottage, began volunteering at the local animal shelter, inspired by Whiskers, and continued her weekly painting sessions with me. Lucas froze my personal accounts, she told me one rainy afternoon as we worked side by side. Says it's to protect our joint assets during this temporary separation. I set down my brush. Are you okay financially? She nodded. I have my own money from before we married. Not much, but enough. And Clara helped me set up access to, my direct distributions from the trust, the ones that don't go through joint accounts. I'm sorry it's come to this, I said. I'm not. She looked up from her canvas with clear eyes. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm making choices instead of fulfilling expectations. May arrived with unexpected warmth and an invitation. Clara called to inform me that the local arts council, the same one that Lucas had mentioned dismissively, was hosting a small exhibition for emerging artists, and she had submitted my name. They've accepted 3 of your Bay Light studies, she said. The opening is next Friday. But I'm hardly an emerging artist, I protested. I'm a retired widow who paints to find peace. Art doesn't check ID, Diane, Clara replied with a laugh. It only asks for honesty. I invited Sam to attend with me. She agreed immediately, but hesitated before adding, "Can I bring someone?" The someone turned out to be James Martinez, the veterinarian from the animal shelter where Sam volunteered. He was about Sam's age, with kind eyes and a quiet manner that put people at ease. He spoke about animals with genuine passion and asked thoughtful questions about my paintings. "The way you capture light reminds me of those moments in the examination room when a frightened animal suddenly relaxes," he told me. "That transition from tension to trust. You've painted exactly how that feels." It was one of the most insightful comments about my work I'd received, and I told him so. "My grandmother was a painter," he explained. "She taught me to look for the story behind the image." As the evening progressed, I watched Sam with James. The natural way they communicated, the absence of performance in their interaction. She seemed at ease in a way I hadn't seen in years, laughing without calculation, listening with genuine interest. Later, as we walked to our cars, Sam linked her arm through mine. "Thank you for tonight, Mom. For everything." "I didn't do anything," I said. "Your paintings were accepted too. Not just that, for showing me there's another way to live." She looked back at James, who was giving us space for our conversation, for helping me remember who I was before I became a Callahan accessory. "You were always more than that," I told her. "You just forgot for a while." She squeezed my arm. We both did. June blossomed with heat and clarity. The Hamptons transformed into its summer self, roads crowded with expensive cars, beaches dotted with umbrellas, restaurants booked weeks in advance. The social season that had once defined Sam's calendar now continued without her. A carousel she had chosen to step off. Lucas made one final attempt at reconciliation, though it felt more like negotiation than genuine healing. He arrived at the guest cottage with flowers and practiced humility. "This has gone on long enough," he told Sam, who relayed the conversation to me later that day in my studio. "People are starting to talk. The Whitakers asked if you'll be at their July 4th party." "What did you tell him?" I asked, cleaning my brushes while Whiskers supervised from his perch on the windowsill. "That I don't care what people are saying," Sam replied, sketching absently on her pad. "That I'm happier now than I've been in years. That if he wants to discuss our future, it needs to be about what's real between us, not what looks good to the neighbors." I studied my daughter, the new ease in her posture, the confidence in her voice. 6 months ago, she had been a carefully curated image of success. Now she was, becoming herself, messy and authentic and strong. "How did he take that?" She smiled wryly. "Not well. He said I was having some kind of belated rebellion, that I'd regret throwing away everything we'd built." She set down her pencil. "But we didn't build it, Mom. We performed it. There's a difference." The next week brought unexpected news. Clara called to inform me that Lucas had indeed filed a legal challenge to the trust provisions, claiming I was mentally incompetent to manage the property and that my actions were detrimental to the family's standing. "Don't worry," Clara assured me. "It's a desperate move with little legal merit. Your father's provisions were clear, and we have ample evidence of your competence." Still, the accusation stung. To suggest that reclaiming my dignity was a sign of mental instability felt like a particularly cruel twist. "There's something else," Clara continued. "We've discovered some irregularities in how Lucas has been handling trust distributions. It appears he may have been diverting some funds intended for family maintenance into personal investment accounts." I closed my eyes, feeling a complex mix of vindication and sadness. "Does Sam know?" "Not yet. I wanted to speak with you first." That evening, Sam and I sat in the garden of my small house, watching the sunset while Whiskers hunted imaginary prey in the flower beds. I shared what Clara had told me, as gently as I could. Sam was quiet for a long time. "I'm not surprised," she finally said. "There were always investments he wouldn't discuss, expenses that seemed excessive." She looked at me directly. "Will you press charges?" "That's not my decision alone," I replied. "It affects you too." She considered this. "I don't want revenge, but I don't want to protect him from consequences either." We agreed to meet with Clara the following day to discuss options. She outlined a path forward that balanced accountability with discretion. Lucas would need to return the misappropriated funds, resign from his position on the trust advisory board, and sign a settlement agreement that included financial terms for the divorce. "He won't agree easily," Sam warned. Clara smiled. That's why we have leverage. The alternative is a very public legal proceeding where his financial misconduct becomes a matter of record. To everyone's surprise, Lucas accepted the terms, with minimal resistance. Perhaps he recognized the futility of fighting, or perhaps he had already set his sights on new opportunities. Either way, by mid-July, papers were signed, agreements reached, and a chapter closed without the public scandal he had feared most. The resolution brought a quiet peace to our lives. Sam continued dividing her time between volunteer work, painting lessons, and increasingly frequent dinners with James. I expanded my artistic explorations, experimenting with new techniques and subjects. We both discovered that life without performance anxiety created space for authentic joy. One warm evening in August, Sam invited me to dinner at a small restaurant in Montauk. When I arrived, I found not just Sam, but James, Clara, Richard Townsend, and several of the artists from my building. "What's this?" I asked, smiling but confused. "A celebration," Sam said, pulling out a chair for me. "The Whiskers and Widows Fellowship is officially launching next month. We wanted to toast the founder." I looked at Clara, who nodded confirmation. The paperwork was finalized yesterday. Eleanor's bequest has been structured as a small foundation that will provide studio space and supplies to artists over 50 who are beginning new creative chapters. And, Sam added, we've secured a permanent gallery space in the community center where fellowship recipients can exhibit their work. I felt tears prick my eyes. Eleanor would have loved this. She set it in motion, Clara reminded me. She saw your worth when others were taking it for granted. James raised his glass to new beginnings at any age. We all drank to that, and as I looked around the table, I realized I was surrounded by a community built on authenticity rather than advantage. People who valued substance over status, truth over appearance. Later, as Sam walked me to my car, she linked her arm through mine. "Are you happy, Mom?" I considered the question with the honesty it deserved. "I'm at peace," I said finally. "And I'm curious about tomorrow. That feels like happiness to me." She nodded, understanding. "I've filed the paperwork to legally change my name back to Callahan," she said quietly. "Not because I'm ashamed of being married to Lucas, but because I want to carry Grandpa's name with the integrity he intended." I squeezed her hand, too moved for words. "And," she continued, "James has asked me to consider joining his practice as the shelter coordinator. It's not exactly the career I trained for, but it feels right." I finished for her. She smiled. "Exactly." December returned, bringing with it the anniversary of the Christmas that had changed everything. The Hamptons settled into its winter quiet, a landscape of bare trees and empty beaches where summer's excesses seemed like distant dreams. Sam suggested we host a small dinner at my house, not the mansion on the bay, but my modest home with the cedar floors and south-facing windows where Whiskers ruled as undisputed king. "Nothing fancy," she insisted. "Just people we actually want to see." We spent the day cooking together. Not for show, but for the simple pleasure of feeding people we cared about. James arrived early to help set the table. Clara brought a homemade pie. Richard Townsend contributed a bottle of wine from his late wife's collection. The ceramicist from my building, Elaine, brought hand-thrown mugs for everyone. As we gathered around my old oak table, I looked at the faces illuminated by candlelight and felt a deep contentment. There were no assigned seats, no networking, agendas, no performance anxiety. Just the warm circle of authentic connection. After dinner, as we lingered over coffee, Clara raised her mug. "I'd like to propose a toast to Edward Callahan," she said. "A man who understood that true inheritance isn't about property or money, but about values that sustain us." "To Edward," everyone echoed. "And," Clara continued with a smile in my direction, "to Diane, who had the courage to remember those values when it would have been easier to forget." I felt a flush of emotion. "I had help," I said, glancing at Whiskers, who was curled contentedly in a gift basket from the shelter. "From unexpected quarters." Later, as guests were preparing to leave, Sam pulled me aside. "I have something for you," she said, handing me a small, wrapped package. Inside was a delicate silver frame containing a photograph I hadn't seen in years. My father and me on his tugboat, both of us laughing as the wind whipped our hair. I was perhaps 10 years old, gap-toothed and fearless. "Where did you find this?" I asked, touching the image gently. "In Grandpa's papers. The ones Lucas never bothered to look through because they weren't financial." She smiled. "There's a note on the back." I turned the frame over. In my father's distinctive handwriting were the words, Diane showing me how to see the bay. The best teacher I ever had. He was proud of you, Sam said softly. Not for what you achieved or acquired, but for who you were. That's the only pride that matters in the end, I replied, hugging her close. After everyone had gone, I sat by the window with Whiskers purring in my lap, watching snow begin to fall, soft, silent, transforming the familiar landscape into something new but recognizable. I thought about the year behind us and the one ahead. The legal battles with Lucas had settled quietly. The Hamptons mansion was now managed as a family property with clear boundaries and protocols. Sam had moved into a small cottage near the animal shelter, where she and James worked together caring for creatures others had forgotten. My artwork had found a modest but appreciative audience, and the first recipients of the Whiskers and Widows Fellowship were preparing for their spring exhibition. None of us were who we had been a year ago. The facades had cracked, revealing something more substantial beneath. Not perfect, but authentic. The next morning, I awoke to sunlight on snow and a text from Sam. Breakfast at the studio? I have ideas for the fellowship's next phase. As I dressed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. Gray hair I no longer colored, lines that mapped a life fully lived, eyes that had finally learned to see clearly. I recognized myself again, not as an extension of someone else's life, but as the author of my own. At the studio, Sam was already sketching concepts for an expanded community art space. What if we added workshops for children? She asked as I hung up my coat. And maybe a section for senior artists to mentor younger ones? I smiled at her enthusiasm. Your grandfather would have loved that. Bridging generations through something meaningful. She looked up, her expression thoughtful. Do you think he knew this would happen when he set up those trust provisions? Not specifically, I said, pouring coffee for us both. But he understood that money without meaning corrupts both. He wanted to protect the integrity of his legacy. Not just the financial part, but the values behind it. The real inheritance, Sam murmured. Exactly. Outside, Southampton was coming to life. Shopkeepers clearing. Sidewalks, early morning walkers with their dogs, the winter sun casting long blue shadows across the snow. It was a world away from the performance we had once maintained, yet somehow more substantial for its simplicity. Sam stood beside me at the window, her shoulder touching mine. I used to think inheritance was about what you got, she said quietly. Now I understand it's about what you give. Whiskers, who had accompanied me to the studio, jumped onto the windowsill between us, surveying his domain with typical feline confidence. He always finds the warmest spot, Sam observed with a smile. And the truest people, I added, remembering the server's comment from that transformative Christmas night. As we turned back to our work, Sam to her community center designs, me to my latest canvas, I felt the presence of all that had brought us to this moment. My father's foresight, Eleanor's friendship, Clara's steady guidance, and even Lucas's challenges, which had forced us to define what truly mattered. The greatest inheritance, I realized, wasn't the property or the trust fund, or even the artistic opportunities. It was the courage to stand in your truth, to recognize your worth beyond your utility to others, and to build connections based on authenticity rather than advantage. Sam looked up as if sensing my thoughts. You okay, Mom? I smiled at my daughter. Not the polished hostess of calculated gatherings, but the compassionate, creative woman she was meant to be. I'm more than okay, I told her. I'm exactly where I should be. And that, I knew, was the richest legacy of all.